joining us. As you know, we're here tonight to hear a very interesting combination of speakers. This will be a reasonably short presentation, and then there will be a chance for people to ask questions afterward. And I just wanted to let you know that, so that if you have, you're waiting with bated breath to quiz either one of the two, you'll have that opportunity. Alan Safianow received his degrees in history at Rutgers and Cornell University, and he taught at IUK starting in 1971, and he retired at the end of 2007. He is now the professor emeritus of history at IU Kokomo. While here, he did a lot of research relating to the Ku Klux Klan, and since has been involved and the chair of Howard County Historical Society's Oral History Committee since 2008. Okay, so he'll present first, and he'll be followed by Judy Lausch. Judy Lausch is an RN who graduated with a BSN from Texas Christian University and has a Master of Science in Nursing from Texas Women's University. She also taught at IU Kokomo for several years and was part of the initiation of the Bachelor's of Science in Nursing program here. She retired from her position as a public health nurse at the Howard County Health Department 2 years ago, and while there, her primary responsibilities dealt with communicable diseases in the community. So like Dr. Safianow, she has an avid interest in history, most notably oral history. So she's been on and off the Board of Trustees for the Howard County Health Department for about 25 years. So the two of them together will talk about the events surrounding Ryan White. And the sponsors of this presentation, I need to give our thanks to the Department of Sociology, History and Political Science, the History and Political Science Club, and the Office for University Advancement. So without further ado, we thank them both for coming, and please feel free to bring your questions forward after they're done.
Good evening. I'd like to thank all the sponsors of this event, and also all of you who came out this evening on a less than spring-like night. And so really very appreciative of that. And I remember Sarah saying something that my presentation would be reasonably short, reasonably brief. And that reminds me of one of my favorite student evaluations when I taught at IUK. And one student wrote down that I told the class more about history than he cared to know. So I'm just warning you. But I am going to try to be brief. I will try to be brief because we are very anxious to hear your questions and your comments. Does everyone here know who Ryan White was? Is there anyone who's unfamiliar with his story? Because I know some of you, looking at the audience, some of you are probably too young to remember Ryan. But you know, I guess, that he was born in Kokomo, a native of Kokomo. He had hemophilia, and this in itself was a great health challenge. And then at the end of 1984, when he was about 13 years old, he was informed that he had AIDS. And we have to remember that AIDS is still a very serious disease, but in 1984 it was considered a death sentence. And there was a lot of fear about how AIDS was transmitted. 1985, the following year, was a transitional year in which we learned more and more about how AIDS could and couldn't be communicated. But there was a lot of confusion in this community and others, particularly when Ryan, who was too ill to attend school at this particular time, but in the summer of 1985, he and his mother Jeannie had wanted to see if Ryan could have permission to return to classes. And the superintendent of schools in the Western District decided against it. He thought there were too many risks involved. And there were parents at Western who were very concerned. And in the end, it was decided that Ryan couldn't attend classes that he would have to receive his education through a less than satisfactory phone hookup. And this received a lot of attention. And we have a photo. Do you want to show a photo of Ryan? This is from the cover of an article on our project, our oral history project, that was published in Traces at the beginning of 2013. And so if you want to read a little bit more about it, this article should be available both at the IUK Library and the public library. And here is Ryan. And Ryan's photograph appeared in so many different places at this time. He was the center of not only attention in this community, but throughout the country and even abroad. And Ryan and his family decided to challenge the decision of the Western School Board. And there were a number of appeals, court cases, and in the end, in February of 1986, Ryan was permitted to return to classes. And then there was a court injunction because some of the parents were still fighting this. And finally, there was a court ruling which allowed Ryan to return again in April of 1986. Well, as you know, probably, that the whites received a lot of threats. There was intimidation. Their house was vandalized. It was a very difficult time for them, and this received a lot of national attention. There are other dimensions to the story as well. That's not the entire story, as I'm sure many of you know. But in any case, Kokomo received terribly adverse publicity, and here are some of the letters that came in to the mayor and other people. Can you just said so? And this will give you a sense of the outside reaction to what was happening in Kokomo. Can you all read that? Is that? And I guess that last comment, may you all die in rotten severe pain for as long as you survive in this world, and may God above never have mercy on your souls and send you all to hell to burn. And that's directed to the city of Kokomo. And then we have another, and this again received a lot of attention, and there were articles, I think a couple of articles in People magazine about the case, and then the comment in their story in 1988 of responding to AIDS has become one of the litmus tests of human decency. Many in Kokomo failed it badly. And so obviously this publicity was hard for many people in this community to take. And in 1987, Ryan and his family moved to Cicero. Reportedly, they received better treatment. They felt that way. And Ryan continued to live for several more years. He became a celebrity. He got to meet people like Elizabeth Taylor. He was befriended by Elton John, Michael Jackson. He testified before the President's Commission on AIDS under President Reagan. And he played an important role in AIDS education at a time when people were beginning to grasp just what they had to take precautions for and what really wasn't much of a threat. And so this is part of an educational process, and Ryan played a very key role. Unfortunately, he died in 1990, shortly before he could graduate from high school in Hamilton County. And shortly after his death, a law was passed, the Ryan White Act, that provided assistance for patients with AIDS and their families. So a very, very important figure. And I became involved in oral history actually earlier than my retirement. And Judy and I both did some interviews, sort of ad hoc. And when I retired, I thought, well, maybe one thing I could do to keep me out of trouble would be to help organize oral history on a more systematic basis. And we started with the project in Continental Steel, which involved its own controversies. And then in 2010, we decided to embark on perhaps an even more challenging subject, and that was Ryan White. And I think already you can appreciate why this was a difficult decision. But the members of the committee all agreed that this was an important story. And one of the missions of the Historical Society, I'm working with the Howard County Historical Society as a volunteer, and one of our missions is to show the connection of Kokomo to the world. And this is certainly a prime example of this. And so we thought we should take on this challenge, but of course with some caution. And there are a number of people involved in this project. They included the director of the Historical Society, Kelly Karakoff, who played an important role in many ways, including providing publicity and support and writing grant applications, which allowed us to get funding for transcripts and equipment. Stu Lauterbach, who is the curator, who played an important role, particularly with respect to setting up a little sound studio for us to interview people. And there was Bonnie Von Clay, and Stu and Bonnie together were involved in the documentation of all the items involved in the oral history procedure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a lot of paperwork. And in addition, we got a lot of donations of photographs and documents, and all of this had to be archived. So there's a tremendous amount of work on the part of the staff. And in particular, I'd like to mention the role of Cindy Moore. Cindy Moore was our transcriber. I don't know if you've ever tried to transcribe from a oral recording. It's very time-consuming. And not only did Cindy do an excellent job on that, but she also tracked all of the paperwork involved in each interview, which is considerable. And then we had the people conducting interviews. There was Judy, Lausch, and there was Diane Knight. And Diane Knight was actually a Western parent back in the 1980s. And she also at that time was president of the Parent Teachers Association. And so she had this deep personal connection. And then, of course, I was the third interviewer. And I think that one of the strengths of the project is that we all had different perspectives. And that was very valuable. I don't think we ever talked about our own particular points of view, but we knew instinctively, we knew we had different approaches, different understandings, and I think that really enriched the project. It was very valuable. And in terms of the time it took, there's like a year of preparation. A lot of research had to be done. The Kokomo Public Library has a memory project, and online you can get hundreds of articles pertaining to the Ryan White story. That was very valuable. And then there were certain books. I think one book is one that was co-authored by Ryan about his own experiences, My Own Story. And then there's another work that's not as well known, but I found it very helpful. It's called Learning by Heart. It came out in 1989, shortly before Ryan's death. And the key author is David Kerp. And one thing that this book does is it compares what happened in Kokomo to other communities. Kokomo was not the only community facing this problem. If I'd had more time, I'd talk about why Kokomo became such a center of attention when there are other communities that face this challenge as well. But it's certainly worth looking at, a little hard to find. And then I might add that Western School allowed me to look at its own records. They have boxes and boxes of material about Ryan White. And it really gave me a lot of insight as to what Western was confronting, what Ryan was confronting. Very valuable, and I'm really glad that we got permission to look at that. And as we deliberated on the project, it took many months to do the research, the background on this. And one of the things we did as a committee was try to develop a mission statement. And we went through several drafts. And mission statements are valuable because they help describe the framework. Who should we interview? What are we looking for in a project like this? It's also a way, something we can give to the people we want to interview so they'll know what we're trying to do. And it's also something we could present to our board of directors so they would know what we're up to and give us their blessing. And then it's something we can use for the community as well. So it's a very valuable tool. And this was suggested by Dan Knight that we do this. And we meet like every month. And after like 3 drafts, we came up with this statement. Can you all read it? I don't know. Yeah. And so it gives you an idea that we wanted to get diverse perspectives. We wanted to acknowledge that we understand how painful and controversial this is. We want to stress how important this is for our history, and we want to illustrate the impact that this had on the county, and that history has to be understood in its inevitable complexities and nuances. And I could go on and on about how oral history helps accomplish this. I won't, but in any case, yeah, so we wanted to get a sense of direction from this. And then there was the other challenge, a very central challenge, and that is, how do we select who we're going to interview? Judy, would you like to say a little bit about that?
Okay, I would like to just start by saying that actually I started a little bit early on this project before we as a committee started, because I interviewed Dr. Alan Adler like in 2007. And the reason I did that is I was working at the health department at the time, and he had retired from his practice as a practicing physician and was going to retire his position as the health officer at the health department. So I knew he had this cabin in Wisconsin, and I thought he was going to move to Wisconsin, and that we were going to miss out on ever, finding out his perspective on the Ryan White situation. So I was talking with Kelly Karakoff, who was the director of the Historical Society at the time, and we decided that it would probably be a good idea if I just went ahead and did an oral history on Dr. Adler. So you can't just, okay, let's have an oral history. You've got to prepare for it, right? So I had to do a lot of research, and one of the things that I did was prepared a timeline, which we then later used. So I'll just show you the front page of the timeline. No, that's... But anyway, it's probably about 10 pages long, but I just started with the vertical file that they had at the library and information that I had, and just every year I put what happened this year, what happened this month, and you tried to put it in a perspective. It was very, very helpful for the whole project to develop that. In fact, I've seen online that other people have done that since then. It's too bad they didn't do it before. I could have used theirs. But anyway, I did a lot of research and developed a timeline, shared the timeline with Dr. Adler, which he also found helpful, and did the interview, and it was very, very interesting. And I do have one soundbite that I would like to share with you from Dr. Adler. This is just a little excerpt.
Honestly, Judy, my biggest fear in all of this was that another child would contact aides in the Western school system from another source, such as either another hemophiliac or having illicit sex someplace or another, and Ryan would be blamed as the one who transmitted. I was confident that if Ryan behaved as we asked him to, that there was no risk of the other students or the staff.
So his main concern was that somebody would contact aides and that Ryan White would get blamed for it. I just think that was really interesting. Now, he did talk about what all he went through when he had to testify in court, and his decisions, the support that he got, how he educated himself about it, because it was really an unknown disease at that time. Physicians in the area were unfamiliar with it. People were unfamiliar with it. Everybody was getting educated about it. And education was a really big factor in this whole episode. Well, anyway, when I did the research, when I did the interview with him, I just took my little cassette player. You know, we didn't have all this wonderful sound equipment that we got with grants later. But so it was really in the rough type of oral history, but it was an excellent interview. But anyway, the little cassette, we had the cassette in the archives, but it wasn't transcribed or anything until like about 2 years later. And what we did is we talked about maybe doing a project and interviewing other people. In fact, I interviewed one more person. I interviewed John Wiles, who was the editor of the Kokomo Tribune at the time all of this happened. That is another really excellent interview. And you can hear these. You can go to the archives at the Historical Society and hear any of these interviews anytime you want to. And they're also transcribed so you can read them. But he had really interesting perspectives on the media. And, well, everybody had good perspectives on the media. But anyway, what we did, another thing that we were doing at the Historical Society is we were developing a long-range plan. And in the first time I was involved with working on the long-range plan, one of the things that we talked about was developing, oral histories on someone. Or we talked about developing it on Ryan White. Well, everybody says, oh, no, that's much too sensitive an issue. The county's not ready for that. Kokomo's not ready for that, because people were very, very sensitive to it. So we went ahead and we did the Continental Still Project, and that was very, very successful. And that was another kind of a controversial subject. And so we thought, well, now can we, talk about Ryan White? So we decided that, okay, we'll do this. So the Continental Still was behind us. We had some successes with that, and during that time we were also able to purchase wonderful sound equipment and hire people to transcribe things. And so what we did for the Ryan White thing is we got the timeline out, we looked at it, we did brainstorming to see who should we interview. And we also we had the transcriptions from the Ryan White, from the Dr. Adler and from John Wiles, so we had those to go by. Plus, we had done an interview with Mayor Daley during Continental Still, and in that he referred to Ryan White because after we talked about Continental Still, I asked him, what were some other things that happened while you were mayor? And the Ryan White issue was one of the things that he brought up. So we had those three things to start with. So we talked about who do we want to interview. And we had a huge list, probably 30 names or more on the list. We really wanted to get diversity. And we think we were pretty successful, although there are some that we still didn't get to interview that we'd like to. We would love to have interviewed Jeannie White, for example. And she just wouldn't answer our calls or have anything to do with us. She really is still pretty bitter about Kokomo, I think. And we would like to have interviewed more of his students that were, students at the time. And they were just reluctant. They just didn't want to be interviewed. In fact, a lot of the people that we interviewed were very reluctant to be interviewed, but they saw the value of preserving this aspect of history. It seemed to be so one-sided that they wanted to have every side represented, and so they were willing to be interviewed because of that. In fact, Bev Ashcraft, who I interviewed and who we'll be hearing a little excerpt from hers in a little bit, told me that she said, if you weren't my personal friend, I would not have done this. So, it helps to know people. So I guess it's, that's one good thing, it's who you know. Okay, so we formed, finally, when we had our long-range plan and the board decided that, well, we need to go with this, so the committee got together and we developed our list, and so we just started interviewing people. And Bev Ashcraft was another one of the first ones that I did. She was the school nurse at Western during this time. So you can imagine what she went through. It was the toughest period in her whole life. And she attended school here as a student, and Sue Dunham was the director at the time, and she said that she remembers calling Sue up and talking to her on the phone, and she says, "You never told us when we were in school that we were going to have to testify in court and how to do that." Because that was one of the things that she had to do. You know, it was a really tough time. Another incident that she talks about going on spring break in Florida. And they were just sitting around the hotel talking, and Ryan White came up, and oh, she said she was from Kokomo, and she says, "You're from Kokomo, that horrible city where they're treating that poor little boy so bad." She says, "I sure wasn't going to tell him I was a school nurse." So, but a lot of good things did come from the whole case of Ryan White. One of the things was some of the things policies that were developed. And, you know, one of the things we're here to talk about tonight is a little bit about universal precautions. So I want to play a soundbite from Bev when she talks about how they got prepared for Ryan returning to school. Now, she doesn't talk about this on the page, but one of the things that they did, just so you know, is, you know, what were they going to do about bathroom facilities? Well, they decided that he would share a bathroom with one of the principals. So that was one of the things. And then they had, you know, plastic utensils for him to use. And there were other little things like that. But, you know, what they were concerned about was, you know, what if he gets a nosebleed? What if he throws up? This type of thing. So Bev addresses this in this soundbite.
Well, when we knew Ryan was coming back to school, I told Mr. Colby, I said, we need to have supplies all around the school. Because if he would have a nosebleed or if he would vomit or any other body fluids, I said, we need to have access to clean that up. And like we said earlier, I had 4 school buildings that I was covering, and I just couldn't be in the middle school all the time. So I had other responsibilities. So I went to a local store, and I bought these little beige file cabinets, like the little boxes that you put little files in. Mm-hmm. I put a red cross on the top of it and on the side. I wrote instructions on how to clean up body fluids. I put rubber gloves in there. I put a bleach solution in there. I put some of the Voban, which is the sawdust, powdery stuff that they used to use at school on vomitus and body fluid spills. And we instructed all the teachers. Matter of fact, I even made a video that they showed to all the subs or any new teacher that came into Western School Corporation. And in hindsight, and I think I've shared this with you before, but if I had just been smart enough, I could have patented those, and we'd all been set financially today. But anyway, we put those in every classroom. Matter of fact, we put them in every classroom in the whole school corporation, not just the middle school, because we felt like it wasn't just because of Ryan White. We really need to protect all the students from everything.
Yeah, because
right. And like I said, Jerry Malone was instrumental in helping me with that. She came out to school, and we sat down and spent hours writing these guidelines for a child attending school with AIDS. They were the guidelines for AIDS. Matter of fact, I wrote the policy for universal precautions out at Western, and I don't know if that's still in use. I've been retired 13 years, but I know several of the school corporations in Howard County borrowed those and used those as the guidelines for their policies, too, for the whole school corporation.
Because, you know, before this, universal precautions wasn't even existing.
Unknown.
It's just so commonplace
right.
now.
Unknown.
So
right.
that is one of the things that has positively
evolved yes, evolved from all of this.
So, you notice that she said that everybody can benefit from this. It wasn't just protecting the students from Ryan White. It was protecting Ryan as well, and it was protecting all students, and it continued to do that. So, what is universal precautions is really treating everybody the same. So, you know, how do you know who has a disease and can infect you? Usually, it's not the person who has it that you need to be afraid of, because you can protect yourself from them. It's who has it but doesn't know or you don't know they have it. Even sometimes they don't know they have it. Who's going to protect you from them? So you have to treat everybody the same. We really weren't doing that so much before. Now, in the hospitals, even, you know, they were doing some precautions, and of course, you know, in the operating room you have the sterility, but on the floor at this time, you know, it was, you know, if you did a procedure or something like this, you know, you would use sterile precautions, but, you know, people didn't wear gloves like they do now. It's just, you know, really changed, and it's a lot more serious now. But the thing is that at that same time, what hospitals were worrying about was what they called then nosocomial infections, which now they call MRSA. So they were really getting concerned then because so much of that was being spread around. So what they had a lot of times was they would have isolation. And they would, you know, you probably even today, because of MRSA, you know, a lot of isolation still takes place. But at that time, they would have isolation rooms, you know, where everybody, if somebody had a disease that somebody else could get from them, you know, you would have to wear a mask and put on a gown and put a head covering on, put little booties on and all of this stuff. And they did that in the hospitals. In some hospitals, they even had wards where they, in Parkland Hospital in Dallas, they had a infectious disease ward at that time. But now it's more universal, where you take care of everybody the same. But the thing is that, you know, that's all well and good. That was in the hospital. But what about in schools? What about out in the community? They didn't really, we really didn't do that then. You didn't see, you know, like all these police TV things where, you know, everybody has their gloves and they put it on before they, you know, start, you know, examining people and whatnot like they do now. I mean, it's just commonplace now. But at that time, this wasn't true. And in fact, the first time that these precautions are mentioned is not until 1988 in the literature. And the MMWR, which is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, in 1988 was the first time that they really talked about specifically treating everyone the same, in particularly with HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. So the practice was probably introduced about the same time the Ryan White case was happening, but it really wasn't in the literature until a little bit later. So, but if you know, it's really interesting if you go back with history. The history of medicine is just really fascinating. And if you go back, you'll see, you know, like quarantines where when they had the plague, you know, they would quarantine the houses and people couldn't leave the houses. So we've kind of gone back to that. And it's interesting because at the time of Ryan White, what was going on in the literature and in the hospitals was they were actually really concerned about isolating patients. And they were saying, oh, they're going to get sensory deprivation and they're being, you know, discriminated against, and they feel like, you know, they've got the cooties and stuff. But this is, it's just really different now. So, anyway, Bev mentioned Jerry Malone, and Jerry Malone was another interview that I did, and it was lucky that I knew her because she lived in Florida, and so we did her interview by telephone. And I do want to play a sound bite from her. She was, at first she was working as a public health nurse at the health department, and she was working with Nancy Mickelson, who was the supervisor, and then Jerry later became the supervisor. But Jerry had just gotten her master's degree at IU and was really into writing policy, which was probably really a good thing for Western School Corporation because she helped Bev write all of the policies, and then she also developed educational programs and whatnot for the community. So I want to have you listen to Jerry's soundbite now.
The spill kit was a plastic bag that's sealed at the top. You can get it at the grocery store. I should remember a little more carefully what was in it, but there was we ordered little bottles and put bleach water in it. We had rubber gloves in it. I know we had those two things, and there was probably more. But and yeah, at first, you know, the reaction to doing this, you know, these men that work in law enforcement, you know, that know about everything, you know, think they are under, you know, can't be hurt by, you know, some kind of bloodborne disease. They were resistant at first, but then, you know, it wasn't too long. You saw it on television. You know, you saw the police put, now you see it all the time, put gloves on, etc. So we were the first people that worked with the Sheriff's Department and the Kokomo Police Department. And
can you tell, did you get
we
this?
even have standing orders for them. And
did you, on the spill kit, where did you get the idea for that? Or
that's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh.
Right now I can't answer.
Okay, I just...
Must come across, you know, in some of the literature or, you know, something I was reading, and I just don't recall for sure.
I just think it's so neat that it was one of the first ones.
Yeah,
you know,
it was so cool.
The first
and
one.
then that all went to everybody in the world, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think first of all, the whole community didn't do this. Yeah, just a small. If people were really against Ryan White, it was just a smaller, pretty small group of people. And because they didn't know, you know, they were afraid for their own children. I think I felt the same way. You would be afraid if you didn't know. And there was a brand new disease and you didn't know how it was transmitted. But I think I just kind of focused in on that goal of healing the community, trying to make them feel good about themselves. Now, whether that ever, you know, I think it did happen in some areas, and especially, you know, a lot of the public areas, the different groups that work throughout Howard County, you know, heard the information, and they were able to go on, and they were able to pass that information, and the schools did a marvelous job.
So, Jerry first was talking about the spill kits.
Honestly, Judy, my biggest fear.
She was talking about the spill kits that they developed, and what they did was they went out to they talked to lots and lots of people, different organizations. They were always, you know, speaking with different organizations about, you know, just telling them about AIDS and how they could protect themselves and, you know, what to expect and this type of thing. Education was a very important thing, and the health department was very involved with educating people. So they could make informed decisions. So there was a lot of public and scientific debate, and he was allowed to return to school, but I think that his case is invaluable when we're talking about how to protect yourselves, and he really added so much to the knowledge about AIDS, and also, you know, in his name, you know, a lot of charity has been developed, and he really did a lot. He was a very nice person. Almost everybody says what a really nice person that he was. So he was really a very good person, and it's something that we shouldn't ignore, and even today. So.
Okay, so as you can see, oral history is a means by which we can tap stories which are perhaps not that well known. You know, we know the trauma that Ryan experienced, but due to circumstances, Western School may or may not have made the right decisions, but they had to confront this issue and deal with it, and that's an important part of the story as well. And so there's so many dimensions to this story, and I'd just like to point out an interview that I did with one of Ryan's neighbors, and actually the sister of one of his best friends, and that's Wanda Bowen Bilodeau. And she's here tonight. And Wanda, and so Wanda had a very close connection with the Whites. She was a neighbor. She went to school at Western, a few years older than Ryan, and she was like a big sister to Ryan. And she was at Western when all of this was happening. And she provides, I think, a very nuanced description. I wish I could play more, but I'd like to just play a few minutes of that interview. Give you a sense of what was happening. Okay, because I've heard different stories about to what degree he was shunned. Some people said that other students would kind of stand against the wall and try to avoid contact. And
there were people that took it to the extreme just to be jerks, just to get attention. There were some that their parents truly had them scared and thought that they were going to get a horrible disease and they were going to die if they came anywhere near him. But I think in some of it was his closest friends were in his grade. And so when he came in, he just didn't have his close-knit peer group with him. And then you have all of the craziness going on and, so many people maybe that didn't sign a petition and really thought it would be okay for him to be in school didn't want the backlash of still being seen with him.
Ah, so there is that factor as well.
Of association.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so there were people that, would maybe, talk to him, say hi, pass him in the hallway, but didn't want to go that extra step of going to his house after school or eating lunch with him just because of how it was going to be seen by others.
So what you're suggesting is a whole range of responses.
Yes.
Some who were sort of deliberately, let me say, obnoxious.
Right, absolutely.
And then there were others who were just frightened. And then there were those who were not so afraid of contact and maybe had some contact, but there was still fear of a stigma.
Yes.
So a whole range of responses. But you indicated that you and some of your other friends would have lunch so that Ryan wasn't really isolated at lunch.
Right. I walked with him a lot through the halls. I had an off period where I worked for the Dean of Students during my study hall. And basically I had free time do whatever he needs to be done. And, of course, he knew certainly the situation. And I would basically just walk to and from class with Ryan and make sure that everything was okay.
And you mentioned that there were comments and so forth made about Ryan. Did you hear these?
Oh, yeah, a lot of people did call him gay, fag.
Do you think homophobia had a key role in this?
I mean, I know there was in the news coming out, about that as far as maybe Rock Hudson or, different famous people. I honestly don't know if people truly thought that was it, even though however much they've been told. I mean, clearly this was a young boy. Or if it was just a way to be mean and nasty and to say words that you normally wouldn't be acceptable to say in public. Not that it was acceptable, but you know what I mean? Just for some people, it was almost just an opening of the door to be naughty.
Or deliberately mean.
Yeah,
suggest.
exactly. Just to be mean, just to say something to humiliate or, really demean someone else in a horrible way. Just to make yourself feel good, I guess.
And we'd say this is frequent? Something that Ryan was affected frequently?
I think the first several weeks, first month or so, absolutely. It was a feeding frenzy.